Easter. It's one of my favorite times of the year. It's a 4-day weekend, and it's carte blanche to stuff my face full of chocolate. What is not to love? Unfortunately, this year I was really looking forward to Easter. I needed a break. I'd started playing a new game, and I was looking forward to sort of getting into that. And I was getting into a new setup for playing that game, which I will put away when we get home, I promise. I really needed a break from, well, everything. And then obviously life took notice of my desire and took one look at my plans and struck me down with flu. That happened Thursday evening, and I don't really remember much of the following 4 days. Now, when I say flu, I mean flu. Not a bad cold, not man flu, actual flu. I had a raised temperature, I was being sick, and I spent days lying in bed, phasing in and out of consciousness. I mention this for 2 reasons. Firstly, and probably most importantly, despite that being a couple of weeks ago, I'm still recovering. My voice is still croaky, and I've had a cough for a couple of weeks now, so I will try and mute, he says. I won't go anywhere near that. I will hit the thing off. Apologies, Felix, I scared the crap out of you. And so, yes, we'll try and avoid that. But yes, if things do go croaky, but I have come prepared. There will be lots of liquids, lots of fluids. So yeah, because it's not entirely conducive to speaking for a long period of time. So I apologize in advance. Secondly, flu is one of those illnesses that people claim to have when they don't have it. And I suspect many of us have done this. Sorry, I can't come into work today. I have flu. Except you probably, you don't. You have a bad cold. Don't get me wrong here. A bad cold is not pleasant, and please do stay at home because I don't want it, nor does anyone else in the office, but let's call it what it is and call it a bad cold. Now, I've had flu 3 times in my life. The most recent bout was not the worst, but it totally wiped me out for well over a week. And flu actually kills between 10 and 20,000 people per year in this country. I had more colds than I care to mention. Some have been really bad. Some have knocked me out of action for days. Are we back on? Yes, excellent. Where were we? Yes, bad colds put me out of action for a couple of days. A bad cold is not pleasant. And there's really no point in pretending that I'm going to be able to function. It's just not good. Trying to find the death rate for colds in this country was impossible. I found figures for flu and COVID rates, and I suspect colds only kill if there are complications, or more to the point, if it is a complication to a much more serious underlying condition. So why do we have this tendency to elevate colds to flu status when there is clearly a difference between the 2 illnesses? I posit that this is purely societal. Colds can be mild, sometimes a little bit more than a sniffle, feeling a bit under the weather. Societal pressure tells us that this is not worthy of taking time off work. There are even adverts for cold medicine that show people being able to pull through and do the presentation despite being struck down with colds, just by virtue of the remedies that they're taking. And even upgrading your cold to one that is really bad has the overtones of kind of hamming it up to take time off. Flu, on the other hand, nobody wants flu, nobody wants you near them when you've got flu. So we simply upgrade ourselves from a bad cold to flu, and then we can phone in sick with impunity. Sorry, I can't come in, I have flu. Brief aside, H1N1, or man flu, is real. It is a bad cold, let's call it what it is, but I propose we accept man flu as the valid reason for not coming into work. We understand that it's not flu, but we also understand that we're not actually well, and we shouldn't be coming in. Anyway, we're not here to talk about respiratory viruses. We're here to talk about neurodiversity. So with that in mind, we'll start with a question. Who here is left-handed? Hands up. 3 of us, 4 of us. And there's maybe 40 people in the room. That's useful, I hope. We're being inclusive. We're an inclusive society here. Let's put our hands up if we're right-handed. 4 of us, as expected. Smaller number here, I think. Hands up if you are ambidextrous. 1 of us. Fantastic. And finally, hands up if you never put your hands up at conferences. 2 of you. So if you were to go to Google and ask, what is the rate of left-handedness? It will tell you yes. Well, I mean, actually what it will tell you is approximately 10% if you look at Wikipedia. It will tell you between 10 and 12% if you look at the BBC. It will tell you 10.6% globally if you look at Psychology Today. It'll tell you 10.9% if you look at just the USA for Psychology Today. It'll tell you between 3.5 and 13.23%. That 0.3 is important, depending on country from Statista.com, or between 9.3 and 18.1%, depending on how you measure left-handedness. Depending on how you measure left-handedness. Seems the question is slightly more nuanced than at first glance. It's not just left or right, A or B, true or false. Depending on how handedness is measured, this is a much more complex question. So, is it left, right? Prefer not to say. I'm not sure. Born left, but I identify as right. Born right, but I now identify as left. Left-handed by necessity, perhaps I've injured my right hand, perhaps I've lost my right arm. Right-handed by necessity, same reasons. Left-handed, but I'm gonna say right because I like to watch the world burn. Ditto for right-handed. Neither, not everyone has hands. Or other. And this is just me spitballing. I'm sure I've missed some, hence the other. Oh, and the answer may actually change depending on what you're talking about, because you may prefer a different hand depending on what activity you're actually doing, and you may pick the hand that has the highest skill level for the given activity. It would appear that the statement, I am left-handed, is a gross oversimplification. A better statement would be, I am predominantly left-handed. Now, left-handedness has, in some cultures, been somewhat vilified. In 1937, the now discredited, this is going to be coming up quite a few times, educational psychologist Cyril Burt wrote of left-handers, they squint, they stammer, they shuffle and shamble, and they flounder like seals out of water. Okay, so I wear glasses. I'm not wearing them at the moment because I need to be able to do distance and close, and I'm not swapping. My physique may be closer to that of a seal than the quote-unquote perfect man. But I'd like to think that I am not up here shambling and stammering. We're in for a long, long session if that's the case. It doesn't help that the left-handed, Latin for left-handed is sinister. Certainly in the West, it has been commonplace to correct any preference of left-handedness, until quite recently, in fact. So this means the historical records of left-handedness are going to be skewed towards right-handedness, with left-handedness being seriously underreported, something that can be seen in this chart. So what we're seeing here is the reporting of left-handedness in the US over time. And from the data alone, it would appear that very few people were left-handed in the 1930s. And then over the next few decades, loads of people suddenly decided that they were left-handed. And at the time, it probably looked like people were just jumping on the left-handed bandwagon, possibly to be trendy. But it was really just the condition being reported more accurately, which is why the figures hit a level and then just stabilize. The flat line is the natural rate of left-handedness. Now, I'm going to argue that for most of human civilization, the handedness of a person had little or no bearing on day-to-day life. I certainly don't see being left-handed as a disability. But modern society, it would seem, is out to prove me wrong on that one. My being left-handed puts me at a disadvantage, thanks to society. Don't believe me? Try using these in the wrong hand. All of that ergonomic shaping is all of a sudden getting into your hands and digging into your fingers in a way that's really quite uncomfortable. I will use scissors like this upside down because it's less painful. This is a screenshot from razor.com where I can choose from 32 different mice. Except if I open the form factor menu, we can see that 28 of those mice are right-handed, 4 are ambidextrous, and one is left-handed. And of those 4 ambidextrous mice, 3 are just different colored variants of the same model. Given the left-handed mouse is actually a variant of their specialist MMO mouse with millions of buttons down the side, my choices are basically the Razer Viper V2 Pro, the Razer Viper V2 Pro, or the Razer Viper V2 Pro. Unsurprisingly, I have a Razer Viper V2 Pro. And the left-handed people aren't even considered when it comes to some of the other peripherals. Ironically enough, this does sit in my left hand, but it forces me to use my mouse with my right, and that's not what I want to be putting it. It's got to the stage where I run a custom keyboard. I can keep my mouse in my dominant hand, and I don't have to fight the key placement. And at first glance, this may look normal, apart from the fact it's isolinear and everything's nice. But if you look at where the keys are, the left-hand side of the keyboard is on the right-hand side, and the right-hand side of the keyboard, the left-hand side of the keyboard is doing its own thing. This is a gaming device as far as I'm concerned. I have another keyboard that I actually use for typing, although I can kind of type on this. So my left-handedness has cost me money, and it could also cause me injury. This is the standard issue SA-80, which is used by the British Army. Come the zombie uprising, if I were to get hold of one of these and fire it in the way that I would want to, it would be very, very bad because I'm getting a face full of hot cartridge. The bullet will fire and the cartridge will eject straight into my face. This is why I'm going for the Special Forces kit, by the way. Get the P90, it ejects down. Meanwhile, the majority of the British Army have to shoot right-handed because left-handed people either weren't considered or were considered to be too expensive. There is not a left-handed version of the SA-80, and this actually goes beyond just handedness. If you are trying to do close quarters battle and going around a corner, you might want to be able to hold your gun in both hands. Who knows? So let's put left-handedness to bed for a bit and make a big tangential leap to OCD, or at least the perception of OCD. I'm leaving this here purposely. Triggering as it may be, this is 2 tiles out of place. It's unlikely to be triggering OCD. Within a couple of minutes of this slide going, you're going to forget about it. You're going to be fine. If it really did trigger your OCD, then you are going to ruminate about it for hours. And you may need to perform certain rituals to help suppress the intrusive thoughts that it's triggering. Apologies if this is triggering real OCD, by the way. People with OCD lose inordinate amounts of time daily due to their condition. And yet it appears to be societally acceptable to use phrases like, oh, I'm a little bit OCD about that. You're not a little bit OCD. You're a little bit pedantic, a little bit anal. And yet, no one describes themselves as a little bit paraplegic if their leg goes to sleep. It's not considered the done thing. Schizophrenia is a really good example here. There are many people who believe that incorrectly that if you have schizophrenia, you have multiple personalities, which isn't actually the case. Schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder are 2 entirely different things. And it doesn't help either that the names of things keep changing. For example, I thought, when I was researching these slides, I thought it was multiple personality disorder. But it's not. The name has changed. It's dissociative identity disorder. Our understanding of these conditions and how we describe them changes. So unless you are keeping up to date with all the changes in diagnosis and nomenclature, it's kind of unsurprising that you may not have the best knowledge of mental health conditions over and above what you see in the media. And what we see in the media can be very, very wrong. Now, ashamed as I am to admit it, for me, ADHD used to simply be code for out-of-control kids as a result of poor parenting. And I'm not entirely sure where I picked up this idea, but it's not uncommon. I seem to recall it's an opinion I formed when ADHD first started becoming part of the public psyche and becoming mainstream in the media a couple of decades ago. I watched programs like Super Nanny. And that taught me that poorly behaved children were poorly behaved because their parents were useless and poor parenting. And I also learned that kids with ADHD were poorly behaved. Ergo, ADHD, poor parenting. Had I decided to do even the barest minimum of research on this particular notion, I would have actually realized how drastically wrong I was. Autism is another one that we get very wrong. Again, because the portrayal of autism in popular culture and the media is typically wrong, misunderstood, or at the extreme end of the condition. And part of the blame here has to go to TikTok, although not for reasons you might expect. These days, it seems like everyone and their dog has ADHD or autism, or ADHD, which is ADHD and autism. It's seen as almost trendy to be jumping onto the neurodiversity bandwagon. Being neurospicy is current and trendy, apparently. And it doesn't help that many of these people are self-diagnosed, probably deciding that they're neurotypical after watching a few TikTok videos, or so the media says. Now, there's a bunch to unpack here, and we are barely going to scratch the surface. So let's look at an interaction that happened on Discord with one of the tech groups I'm part of. So A, names have been changed here to protect the innocent. Is everyone autistic? Simple question, right? From my point of view, no, everyone isn't autistic. We're just seeing an explosion in people who have been self-diagnosed. Simple answer, but not an obvious answer, which is why the question was asked in the first place. I mean, the concept of autism was sort of coined in 1911 by the German psychologist Eugen Bleuler. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Apologies to any Germans. He used it to describe the symptoms of the most severe cases of schizophrenia, a concept that he'd also created. In the UK, the term autism was used to mean that until the 1950s. And it was only in the 1960s when child psychologists in the UK challenged Bleuler's findings, and the meaning of autism was reformulated to be, well, the exact opposite of what it actually meant previously. The 1940s also saw Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger, an Austrian physicist working on child neurology, and Asperger's syndrome, or AS, is named after Friedrich Asperger. And for a long time, Asperger's was its own diagnosis. Asperger's has problematic associations. Asperger was working closely with the German government of the time, thus invoking Goodwin's law and a whole double-edged can of ball games that I am just not going to get into. In fact, the Soviet child psychologist Gurynia Sukhareva described something remarkably similar to Asperger's in 1925, leading people, or some people at least, to start preferring to call it Sukhareva syndrome. I have long recognized certain elements of Asperger's syndrome in myself. And I did wonder for a long time, was I perhaps a little aspy? And shout out to the people who get the slide, you are my people. There is at least one of us. In fact, I never even considered the possibility of autism because Asperger's. And possibly Rain Man. You drop a pot of toothpicks on the floor, and rather than going, there are 246 toothpicks, I'm going to make some kind of sarcastic and probably socially inappropriate comment. Either that, or I'm going to be typically British and just say nothing. It depends on the setting, but clearly not autistic. It was only a couple of years ago, actually, that I discovered that Asperger's isn't really a thing anymore. It's been folded into the autism diagnosis, or autistic spectrum disorder, or autistic spectrum condition, or whatever you want to call it these days. Some people don't like the word disorder. So, autism. It's a concept that's only really been around for just over a century, which has changed definition drastically 50-odd years ago, and which has been subsumed into other conditions which are less than 100 years old. So it isn't really that well understood by people outside of psychiatry. And I'd argue that it's not necessarily really well understood by people in psychiatry. Oh, and the majority of studies have been conducted on young boys. Spoiler alert, girls can get autism too. And autistic children grow up to be autistic adults, many of whom never got diagnosed because being autistic was well, I mean, it's for a myriad of reasons, but they got missed. Enter TikTok. The easy dissemination of information about neurodiversity on this platform by people who are actually neurodiverse. And we get to see that content. And all of a sudden, we're all experts on autism, right? Well, let's return to our Discord conversation. Our erstwhile questioner, is asking a genuine question here. This is not him trolling. I know them, they're not that type of person. But to clarify, they do actually add more context. Firstly, this post is not to trigger anyone or be insensitive to other people and any battle they may have had in life. Good start. We've had our fair share of misunderstandings on social media by people misconstruing things. And like I say, I happen to know they're a good person, and they are simply asking you a genuine question from a genuine point of interest. In fact, they state as much. But a genuine thought I had this morning after seeing 3 I'm autistic posts on LinkedIn is, at which point does it just become accepted that we are all different, not all robotic, and the same? I mean, I would argue that should already be an accepted position, but different and autistic are not the same. They are, well, different. And we are all different, regardless of any kind of neurospiciness. And they go on. It's great from the perspective of people understanding themselves better, but by everyone getting diagnosed, does it take away from the meaning of it? Interesting question. I think I'd counter with, does everyone suddenly getting diagnosed with COVID take away from the meaning of it? Now, that's a deliberately antagonistic response on my part, but this isn't going to be a simple black and white discussion with a bunch of easy answers and a happily ever after. Trust me, if I had the easy answers, this session would be on my yacht in the Caribbean. So I need you paying attention. I need your critical minds engaged. We have an innocent question. Reasoning is shown, and we get our first response. It's a spectrum. Everyone is on it somewhere. Shots fired. Okay, full disclosure. I used to hold this position. I was wrong, so absolutely no judgment here. Many of the audience have misconceptions about various neurodivergencies. And I would argue that unless you are a trained psychologist or a trained psychiatrist and specializing in that subject, that's perfectly fine. We can't know everything. And it's not like that doesn't make sense. Here is a spectrum of visible light for the peasants among you. And at this end, all of the autism. And at this end, none of the autism. Ergo, we're all somewhere on the spectrum, right? Wrong. Part of the problem here is the terminology. The autistic spectrum doesn't look like this. It's more like this. And just because there is some overlap between symptoms doesn't necessarily mean that you have the condition. I mean, let's take a totally absurd example. I have, to my chagrin, a belly that I'm not happy with. It's big. I am constantly tired. From time to time, I get random cravings for food. So am I perhaps a little bit pregnant? Of course I'm not. I share some superficial symptoms of pregnancy, but I lack some of the basic requirements of being pregnant. A womb, for starters. And yet, with other conditions, we're happy to correlate a few symptoms with somehow having that condition. I can't come in. I have flu. I'm a little bit OCD about that. Autism shares a lot with the human condition, but it's also a neurological condition. Studies have shown that the young autistic brain does not undergo a period of synaptic pruning, a system that happens in non-autistic brains. Synaptic pruning is exactly what it sounds like. Between the ages of about 2 and 10, the brain prunes unnecessary connections, with about 40% of the brain's synapses being eliminated. The reason for this is to stop the brain being flooded with too much irrelevant information. Effectively, it is filtering out white noise. Consider it refactoring. One study has shown that the autistic brain only prunes 16% of synapses during this process, which means that the autistic brain is physically dealing with and processing more data, more information every moment of every day. An autistic person literally doesn't think like a non-autistic person. They don't experience life like a non-autistic person. And as a result, their outlook and their thought processes are different. Turns out that synaptic pruning may also be related to schizophrenia, but with the opposite reason. There's too much pruning, which in some respects means that autism is literally the exact opposite of schizophrenia, despite starting out being associated with it. ADHD is also a neurological condition where the brain is, again, different to that of a neurotypical brain. In the case of ADHD, there's maldevelopment of areas such as the prefrontal executive network. The ADHD brain has issues with noradrenaline and dopamine, along with a whole host of other issues. Now, depending on how you slice it, ADHD was first written about in 1978 by a Scottish doctor, Sir Alexander Crichton. But that said, it wasn't until the 1900s that things started getting properly formalized. And not until the late 1980s that we got ADHD as a name. So it isn't a new condition, but ADHD is new in the public psyche. And new enough that there are a whole slew of adults out there who have been completely missed and not diagnosed as children because it wasn't something that we were looking for. I saw a video on TikTok the other day with a creator who appeared to be a medical doctor based purely on a perfunctory glance at their name and the video description and various other things. I suspect if they are a medical doctor, they're not very good, but yeah, we'll get into that later. They presented this problem. Take this image and make it symmetrical. Now, I'll give you a couple of seconds to sort of come up with your own solutions, your own sort of conclusions. I had two solutions. The creator also had two solutions. They presented both of their solutions with the claim that they were the only two solutions. Their first solution is additive. Place another 12 squares into the image to create symmetry. Their second solution was reductive. Remove the superfluous 4 squares. Then there was some rubbish about your answer reflecting your outlook on life and how one of the views is supposedly better. I switched off at that point. Incidentally, one of my solutions was this, which neither adds nor removes squares and gives rotational symmetry. And this, I mean, again, no squares added or removed, just moved. Now, this video is clearly pushing rubbish. The challenge is poorly defined, and as stated, it probably has infinite solutions. The argument resulting from the challenge cherry picks from the data to fit the narrative. And the whole thing was one of those really sort of fluffy, meaningless hot takes on life with zero content. TikTok and the wider internet as a whole is riddled with rubbish like this. Which Pokemon Go are you? And I don't doubt there are people out there who have watched a couple of videos on TikTok of similar quality, spotted a few superficial similarities with their life and decided, oh, I have ADHD, or I have autism, or I have ADHD, or whatever particular thing the video is pushing. I mean, it is quite possible to go onto the internet and diagnose yourself with anything, except lupus. It's never lupus. Is it a problem? Yes, it is a problem. Is it the cause of the uptick of neurodivergent folks? No. That uptick is coming from a number of places, most notably an increase in awareness and in diagnosis, including the diagnosis of all of those adults that were missed as children. We're here somewhere, and at some point, it is going to level off. And part of this increased awareness is actually thanks to platforms like TikTok, giving the neurodivergent folks a platform where they can describe their lived experience. And people can share what it is actually like to be neurodivergent. And I cannot overstate how important and positive that can be for other neurodivergent folks and for society as a whole to learn about us. I have, on a number of occasions, and by various people, been asked, are you human? Now, my initial reaction is, yes, I am demonstrably human, which kind of drives the point home of the question, really. The question here is really, do you experience life as a normal human being? We'll ignore the fact that the word normal here is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and no, I don't experience life like most other people. I should probably actually introduce myself. I tend to skip the introductions because, well, we started with a slide with my name on it, and there's a speaker profile in the program and various other places for the curious, and for the minority who want to know more, I'm Googleable, and if you really want to know more, I'm here all week, come talk to me. However, I'm not sure any of that covers my credentials to be stood here talking at you today, credentials such as they are. So hi, I'm Don Davis. I am autistic. I was late diagnosed, finding out on my 48th birthday. I have a theory that birthdays cause autism. It has less scientific rebukes than vaccines causing autism, and is therefore more credible. I've had a journey of about 32 years trying to find out what was wrong with me. I also have a partner who doesn't so much suffer from ADHD as AD4K. I have learned an awful lot about what it really means to suffer from ADHD from her. Legally, we are both disabled. Statistically, we both have a shorter life expectancy due to the higher than average rate that neurodivergent folks check out early, for want of a better term. Realistically, we both struggle to function in this world. And yet, superficially, we both present as normal. Again, the word normal is doing a lot of heavy lifting. This is due in part to something that's called masking. Literally, hiding our true selves to fit in and appear more normal. Masking is generally associated with autism, but it's something that people with ADHD do because we are different, and society doesn't like that. I am a high-masking individual. I am very good at hiding my disability. So good, in fact, that I didn't even realize I had it for the majority of my life. But that doesn't mean I don't have a disability. Masking is partly for my benefit. I learned at an early age that the things that I do or think or might say may cause me to sometimes be viewed in a negative light. So part of the masking is constantly filtering what I'm saying, and at the same time being focused on making sure I'm not staring at people, that my body language is correct for the situation, and that I don't stand out and I'm not drawing too much attention to myself. This week's a bit of a difference. But masking is also for the benefit of others. I've lost count of the number of people who have got close to me and wanted to know the real me. And when I've shown them, they've run a mile. It's happened quite a lot. Dealing with an unmasked neurodivergent person can make people feel really very uncomfortable. We have a tendency of saying the unspoken things that you just don't say. We call things out. We perhaps, and most damaging from a societal perspective, ignore the normal hierarchies. We are awkward. We are problematic. And we don't fit in. Now, one of the interesting side effects of getting diagnosed as autistic is that people seem to get more autistic after a diagnosis. And this is due in part to us just accepting ourselves as ourselves. We're no longer relying on our masks quite so much. And trust me, masking is exhausting. I love this conference. I love speaking here. I love the people. I love the interactions, the lightning talks, everything. But it's also a highly masked situation for me. And it is exhausting. There is a very, very real cost to me attending. And I will pay in the coming weeks. Sunday is going to suck bigly. That said, since I've got my diagnosis, I've become better at looking after myself and finding ways that suit me to look after myself. If I need to, I shall retire to my room and get some quiet time. Maybe even grab a nap. I cannot overstate the importance of a nap. And not just because I am getting old. Now, by show of hands, who here has heard of spoon theory? A few of us. In her 2003 essay, The Spoon Theory, American writer Christine Miserandino, I hope I've got that right, describes how she used spoons to effectively describe her experience with lupus, because it turns out sometimes it is lupus. In spoon theory, spoons are a limited currency, and they must be spent in order to perform daily actions. For example, brushing your teeth may take a spoon. Cooking may take 2 spoons. Most critically, however, not everyone gets the same number of spoons, and the same task may cost different people varying amounts of spoons. You now need to balance the number of spoons you have got on any given day with all the tasks that need to be done. Run out of spoons, and well, that's you done for the day. Or you go into spoon debt. The theory has been tweaked over the years by different people. As a metaphor, it's hugely simplistic, and yet it does a very good job of showing how people with chronic illnesses struggle. For example, a healthy person may wake up with 20 spoons. Their morning routine is 1 spoon. Their commute is 2 spoons. Work is quite brutal today, so it's 11 spoons. Another 2 spoons on the commute back. 3 spoons to cook dinner. You spend your last spoon watching an episode of your favorite show because, yes, all tasks take spoons, even the ones you enjoy. And now you're out of spoons. It's time for bed. Someone with ADHD may wake up with 10 spoons. The same day sees them getting home from work with a 5-spoon deficit. Exhausted, they collapse into bed, foregoing dinner or any time doing stuff they enjoy. Their brain then starts to ruminate on the fact that they're just exhausted all the time. And then they lie there, doom scrolling to the early hours, dreading tomorrow's spoon allocation. And this is where another misunderstanding starts creeping in. If you're tired, why stay up late looking at your phone? Put it away, get some sleep. It's simple. This is, of course, absolutely fantastic advice. It's surprising that no one with ADHD has ever thought of this before. That was sarcasm, by the way, in case my autism was kicked in. An ADHD brain in hyper mode is not something that you can just switch off. Also, tiredness has no bearing on the ADHD brain being hyper or not. You could be lying there begging for sleep's sweet embrace with your ADHD brain going, "Oh, hello, have you considered everything?" For a true glimpse into the sheer speed and randomness of the ADHD brain, I encourage you to talk to my partner over there. Allow her to speak out to you for any length of time and see if you can keep up. Now imagine trying to go to sleep with that going on in your brain, unconstrained by the low throughput of human speech. Now another symptom of ADHD is executive dysfunction. The ADHD brain struggles to do tasks. This presents as them being lazy and disorganized, a moniker that is often leveled at ADHD sufferers. But this isn't some character flaw they can just overcome through proper use of to-do lists and a little bit of effort. Executive dysfunction is a neurological problem. It is related to issues with neurotransmitters and them not working in the same way as a non-ADHD brain. In fact, the ADHD brain can go into complete paralysis when faced with too many choices. An easy way to see this is to take anyone with ADHD to a restaurant and just get them to choose something from the menu. My partner will ask everyone at the table what they're getting. She will ask the server what they recommend. And then once the list has been narrowed down to everything on the menu, she will then fret over making the wrong choice. In fact, yesterday, she started by asking the bar staff. I was very impressed with this. You came with 4 choices narrowed down already. And this kind of choice paralysis isn't just some kind of cute character trait. It is a chronic disability that has profound effects on the ADHD brain's ability to navigate the world. And yet, you take an ADHD brain and put it into a crisis situation, and it is going to shine, especially if that crisis is external. Which leads us neatly to the notion that ADHD and autism are somehow superpowers. My autistic superpower is the ability to restrain myself when someone suggests that my disability is somehow a superpower. That said, there are some interesting research papers on the notion that having people with ADHD and autism in your tribe is beneficial to survival. They fill a very specific niche. Niches which aren't quite so obvious in our modern world. So here, employees with ADHD are 30% more likely to have chronic employment issues, 60% are more likely to be fired from a job, and 3 times more likely to quit a job impulsively. It's a 2008 study and it's America, but I'm pretty sure these figures are no better for the UK in 2024. Similarly, a 2020 study of the ONS showed that 21.7% of autistic people are in employment. Of the somewhat interesting categories, I'd suggest you go look at the original source of this one. There are some very interesting categories of disability. Autism ranks as the lowest, below severe or specific learning difficulties. But then this isn't going to be showing the whole picture, because autism is a spectrum and people with autism can have varying support needs. I suspect that of the people who have similar kinds of support needs to myself, more than 21.7% are going to be employment. And at the other extreme, employment rates are going to be much lower. And this is where this talk starts getting difficult for me, because while those figures are not great, there's a reason that they are where they are, and there are no easy solutions. There are vast swaths of grey area and entire oceans of muddied waters. Now, employees in the UK enjoy certain protections around discrimination. For example, disabled people can expect accommodations in the workplace. I think we can all agree that a wheelchair user in an office can reasonably expect step-free access to their desk and access to a disabled toilet. I think we can probably also agree that a wheelchair user cannot reasonably expect to become a firefighter with wheelchair access to the fire engines and step-free access to the fires. Hell, I'm able-bodied and I'm pretty sure that I couldn't do a firefighter's job. Clambering in those things is not easy. So what are reasonable accommodations when it comes to neurodiversity in the workplace? What point does your disability simply prevent you from doing the work? And it doesn't help that our disabilities present in such a way that are super easy to just manage out. We are dismissed as rude, as lazy, as disorganized, with poor communication skills. At what point do you even tell your employer that you have a disability like autism or ADHD? It's not something I've ever directly shared with an employer. Partly because I'm not sure there's a huge amount of accommodation that I would be given, and partly because there is a huge stigma when it comes to neurodiversity and mental health issues in general. In fact, I've actually had reasonable accommodations removed from me. Part of autism is that we are constantly processing huge amounts of information. All of those synapses that never got pruned are processing what's going on in our environment. And sounds can be hugely distracting for me. To focus, I need to be able to plug in my headphones and just block out the world. And I retreat into my head, and it's just me and the computer. And given my job revolves mostly around computers, this is quite a handy skill. But conversely, if you put me in a loud environment, for example, being in a large open plan office that has a call center in it, and then forbid me from using headphones, my productivity is going to crash. Also, my stress levels are going to skyrocket, because not only do I need to deal with a consistent and permanent stressor that I cannot block out anymore, but I am now also highly aware of the fact that I am not producing the same output I was before. At the time, I didn't know I was autistic. It would be interesting to see how that situation would have been panned out if I had been diagnosed, and if I'd stated that headphones were actually a reasonable accommodation. I'm not sure it would have gone well. Thankfully, most of my career has seen me being able to wear headphones and do simple things like get up and leave my desk whenever I want. And as an autistic person, that is really important. If I were tied to my desk, I would be pretty sure that I would have suffered more than the small handful of autistic meltdowns I've had at work. I think for most people, an autistic meltdown is probably synonymous with a tantrum. So, if I have a meltdown, you are going to see a grown man having a tantrum. And this may well be accompanied by suggestions that perhaps I should grow up, or that I am just being pathetic. A meltdown for me is synonymous with complete and utter overwhelm. Everything is too much. There is too much sensory input coming in from outside. There is too much coming into my eyes. There is too much coming into my ears. My clothes are too much. My skin is too much. The smells are too much. And my brain is just ready to explode. adrenaline and God knows what else is coursing through my body, and eventually it just gets too much. The pressure gets too much, and I explode. And it's like a red mist descends, and the monkey brain gets to take over the reins. I detest meltdowns. They leave me deeply embarrassed, for starters, about my behavior. They leave me mentally drained for days, if not weeks. And societal expectations are such that even I view my behavior as childish. So if I, armed with all the knowledge and lived experience and understanding of the autistic condition, if I cannot be an ally for myself, how can I expect other people to be allies and to excuse it? So the reasonable accommodation here is to just let someone go somewhere quiet and let them calm down and avoid triggering a meltdown. Except, how much leeway do we give? At what point does it stop being sympathetic to my needs and start becoming just treading on eggshells? Don't upset them, they might explode. And that's not a good outcome for anyone either. Now, since we're on the subject of meltdowns, we should probably talk about autistic burnout. The two are somewhat linked. Burnout means you are no longer able to self-regulate. And you are no longer able to function as well as you might have previously. And this makes it harder to spot and avoid meltdowns. Also, meltdowns are hugely traumatic events and incredibly draining. A meltdown itself can lead to burnout. Photo being taken. Camera's obviously broken. Autistic burnout isn't like typical burnout. We're not just overworked and in need of some time off to recover. We are literally out of resources. 0 spoons every day. The National Autistic Society describes burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic life stress and a mismatch of expectations and abilities without adequate support. It is characterized by pervasive, long-term exhaustion that can last 3 or more months, loss of function, and a reduced tolerance to stimulus. It can be accompanied by an increase in mental health issues like anxiety and depression. And as well as withdrawing from your usual social activities, you also withdraw from relationships. There's difficulty with executive functioning, such as completing tasks and making decisions. You can imagine the call, "Hi, it's me. Look, I'm suffering from autistic burnout. I should be back in the office in the next 3 to 6 months. I have flu." Autistic burnout is completely incompatible with most jobs. Life becomes a hard slog of spending whatever spoons you might be able to cobble together to make sure you just don't lose your job. There is nothing left for self-care, nothing left for relationships, nothing left for hobbies, specialist interests. You know, the things that might actually help me get out of burnout. And so that 3 months becomes a year or more. During my autistic burnouts, I have had 2 mental breakdowns. The first time I was lucky enough to be working for an investment bank. It's a high-pressure environment. Lots of people break for various reasons. So you get signed off work for a bit and you get shoved off to London Bridge where there's a private clinic there that treats the broken investment bankers. And then you get thrown back into the grinder once you're vaguely whole again. I mean, yes, as hideous as it sounds, it did mean I got to keep my job. Breakdown number 2 resulted in me being fired and started a cascade of events that I am still dealing with 8 years later. But I'm high functioning, I am low support needs, and I am also a white, middle-class male. I have good connections, all of which has no doubt helped me muddle through. I consider myself very lucky to have been able to maintain an income and avoid the poverty trap that so many others fall into. An interesting question is, has my life turned out the way it has because I am autistic, or in spite of me being autistic? Autism doesn't define me, but it does explain an awful lot about me, including my love of computers. You will recall I have been asked by numerous people on numerous occasions, are you human? God, I wish I wasn't. Humans are badly put together, irrational, illogical, fleshy meat sacks that require so much maintenance. And I say that as a particularly badly put together, irrational, illogical, fleshy meat bag. Computers are far, far easier to understand, as are the worlds that we can run on them. Now, gaming for me is an escape. I can leave this complex, complicated world just for a moment and exist somewhere else with clearly defined rules. Somewhere that I can understand. And I am far from alone here. IT seems to attract its fair share of individuals. And I mean that in the most loving way possible. I suspect many of us here find interacting with computers easier than interacting with people. It is an industry that seems to attract certain neurotypes. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if the rates of autism and ADHD in our industry were higher than average. Which means we really should be working out what reasonable accommodations look like. What does an ADHD-friendly and an autism-friendly workplace look like? And here I run into a brick wall because I don't know. Well, I do know, sort of. But I'm not sure if they're reasonable accommodations. And even if they are reasonable, I'm not sure if people will even listen. One of the problems I have with these talks is the people who really should be in here are not in here. But I am not entirely empty-handed. There is a whole raft of small things that people can do to make the workplace nicer for neurodivergent folks, and perhaps even neurotypical folks as well. We'll start with my least favorite thing ever. Can we have a chat later? This is something I've covered numerous times in my talks. You, with all of the context, may think nothing about asking for a quick chat later. Me, with none of the context, will now enter a state of panic. From now until the meeting, all I can do is obsess over what's going to happen, over me getting told off, over my disciplinary, over my getting fired for gross misconduct, for something, but it's going to be bad. It is the perfect way to destroy the productivity of certain people. And that productivity is destroyed prior to the meeting, and even if the chat is innocuous, recovery from the levels of heightened stress that you've been under is going to take time. Tell me what you want to talk about. Hey, could we have a quick chat about the pipeline project? There's some new requirements coming from the business side. Cost you a few seconds. It has saved me hours of dread. March 2020, the month that went on forever, showed us that remote working for many jobs was indeed possible, especially in our industry. Companies such as Revelio, where I work, stayed fully remote once the lockdowns were lifted. Others started requiring people to come back into the office, at least for some of the time, often for property portfolio reasons. Working from home isn't for everyone. Not everyone has space for it. Not everyone has the setup. Not everyone can cope with living and working in the same place. Some people find it easier to work face-to-face and have in-person interactions. It's true. I've seen it. My personal feeling is that working and your workplace should now be hybrid. An employer should offer office space should you need it, or if you would prefer it. And they should allow those who can work from home to work from home. Now, this one is actually a concession for everyone. During the pandemic, I saw even the most ardent extroverts, I saw the extroverts struggle almost straight away, but even the most ardent introverts started struggling by the end of the pandemic. I mean, on the other hand, I loved it. I had more social interactions during the lockdown than I did for the years before and after the pandemic. I mean, the odd technical issue aside, I often find socializing via Zoom or similar kind of thing to be far easier than socializing in person. First of all, I can drop any pretense of eye contact. So much so that with the social calls that we were having during the pandemic, I had my camera set up here above this monitor where my game was, and Zoom here. So I am looking straight at you. Well, no, I'm looking straight at my game. And this resulted in a bit of an odd side effect because occasionally I would want to turn and look at the people who were talking to me, except now they're seeing the side of my head. I miss that time. I didn't have to choose between going out or staying in and playing games because I could do both at the same time. And there wasn't the issue about, well, if I stay out until 9, then I've got to get home and it's going to be 10 and then I've got to... No, if the thing finishes at 9, my bed is 20 seconds away. Remote working also gives me a huge amount of control about how I interact with people on a daily basis. Face-to-face discussions and now video calls, we've already established I love that, much easier for me. And most of the rest of the communication is generally done via Slack. And Slack is an asynchronous medium where I can take the time to process any request and to formulate an answer. And even if you're having a sort of near real-time conversation, it is still asynchronous. I can take 20 seconds, 30 seconds to process something and then respond, and it doesn't seem weird. If I'm having a face-to-face conversation with you and I stop for 30 seconds, or 2 seconds if you're dating someone with ADHD, you'll be like, hello. On bad days, I go non-verbal. But that's fine because most of the communication is entirely non-verbal. It's not that I won't communicate. I will just communicate via Slack. It's very difficult because my house is set up with an Alexa, and that's how you turn the lights on and off. So on those days, I have to turn them on and off with my phone. Now, compare that to an office where I need to be masking all of the time, and I may be forced into situations where I can't just be non-verbal without seeming to be rude. I can't bow out of the small talk that I don't understand and don't see the point of. And I have the sensory bombardment that is an open plan office going on all of the time. Although there are things we can do here, we've already discussed. Let me wear headphones. Honestly, this blocks out a lot of the distractions. It also shows if I'm approachable or not. Let me communicate via Slack. It doesn't have to be face-to-face all the time. Don't just assume that I'm happy to drop everything and turn around and talk to you. Perhaps ping me via Slack in the first instance. And if I'm verbal and interruptible and it's something quick, chances are I will come and talk to you, assuming you are amenable to that as well. So we can plan and then have a chat. When I looked after a small office in Norwich, I'd sometimes come in, sit down and explain on Slack that I was currently non-verbal. And the people in the office, they understood me. And communication would just happen via Slack until such point as I would become verbal again. And that actually really helped. It could take a day where I wouldn't want to speak and turn it into half an hour. I'm not sure how that would work in a larger office. I don't know, especially if I wasn't in charge, but I'm not even sure if it would work if I was in charge. But wouldn't it be nice if we had more control over our working environment, regardless of whether we were autistic or ADHD? I mean, it's a thought. And while we're taking more control of our working environment, wouldn't it be great if we could have more control over our working hours? My partner doesn't have a 24-hour body clock. She goes to bed when she goes to bed, and she wakes up when she wakes up. And this does not mesh with 9 to 5. Also, ADHD means that there are days when work isn't happening, but there are other days when the hyperfocus kicks in and she's not going to sleep until the project is finished and done properly, even if it takes days. I similarly have good and bad days. I'm high functioning and high masking, and I can generally engage in presenteeism if I need to. But it's actually much better for productivity if some days I can just go and have a nap, or take the day off, or do something else. I know some companies allow things like duvet days or mental health days, but these tend to be limited. What we really need is fluid working. In our industry, we are hopefully all highly skilled, highly motivated individuals. We're also all adults, notionally. We shouldn't need someone making sure that we're doing the hours and that our fixed hours are hit. We shouldn't need someone making sure that I'm in my desk at 9 o'clock and that I'm staying there until 5. In fact, if you require someone to make sure that your employees are there at 9 and stay there until 5, you've got bigger problems in this industry. Now, we may need some fixed hours, yes. The team does need time to sync up, but honestly, that can be a fixed period of a couple of hours that suits people. Some ADHD folks benefit from the idea of body doubling. That is just having someone there with them to help stay focused and on track, which to me sounds very much like pair programming. I mean, at the same time, it does also sound like I'm going to have to make a second hire in order to make the first hire work. I mean, there's a whole raft of rethinking we need to do on things like collaborative working and also how it's presented. This kind of thing needs to be normalized. It needs to be an acceptable work practice and an accommodation for people who find it useful. This kind of collaborative working is not doubling my expense in order to get the job done. It is, in fact, applying more resource so I can have more output than 2 individuals individually. I think we've got to a stage in our industry where we have convinced management that pair programming is actually the exact opposite of turning 2 programmers into 1. So let's build on that. Also, tell me the why of what it is you are asking me to do. Neurodivergent folks often struggle with doing a task if they don't understand why they're doing it. We may look at what it's been asked and gone, that's a dumb idea. And from our context, it may well be a dumb idea. So give us the context as to why it isn't dumb. Why are we doing this? What are the constraints that are forcing us to do it this way? Give us proper reasoning. And of course, we'll then go away and we will do it. And if you can't explain to us why it's not a dumb idea, maybe it's actually a dumb idea and we should be doing something else. Simply doing a task just because we've been told to isn't necessarily the best idea. Some ideas are poorly thought out, half-baked, lack context. And perhaps that context is something that you have that the people who are introducing the ideas don't have. And this suggestion goes beyond neurodivergence. You're employing us for our expertise, for God's sake, and our creativity. We shouldn't be expected to blindly churn out code for features we don't have a larger understanding about, because we're not going to be able to do it properly. We're not going to be able to do it efficiently, and we're not going to be able to do it in a coherent way. A coding sweatshop is not good for business. I get it. Sometimes the why is just the business are panicking and they think this will change things, so let's just quietly do it. But at least now we know that we're not the only people who think this is a dumb idea. And honestly, that buys you a lot. You've given us the why, or at least the why as you understand it. Oh, and for the love of all that is holy and good in this world, don't make me attend the mandatory fun day. The companies seem to love their mandatory fun days. My previous company actually had this one absolutely sorted. If we had a meal out or a Christmas do or anything similar, you were not required to come. Instead, you could have the value of that meal or whatever it was we were doing and use that money to engage in something that you found fun, with a few caveats for moral and legal reasons. Things like Secret Santa, they just drive me insane. I don't really do Christmas. I don't really understand Christmas. So why would I want to subject myself to trying to work out what cheap gift to give some random person in my team so that they can then give me some random cheap crap in return? My best friend and I have for many years subverted this one. And Christmas and birthdays, we simply buy something that we want and say it's from the other person. So you quite literally go, happy birthday, what did I get you? As an autistic person, my idea of fun is completely different to your idea of fun. And we don't even need to factor in autism or differences for enjoying different things. People are different. Your idea of awesome may be someone else's idea of hell. So, none of these accommodations are particularly onerous. And that they should make life a little better for neurodivergent folks already working. But will it shift those employment figures? Will it improve the rate of job loss? Maybe a little. But to truly move the needle, we need to change the narrative. Neurodivergent folks typically sit quietly in the corner masking. They don't highlight their condition because it's stigmatized. They may not even mention it to employers. We need to completely change the dynamic there. We need to acknowledge neurodivergence in the workplace, removing the stigma, educating people. Diversity training needs to include way more than simply just gender and race. Mental health as a whole needs to feature far, far more. We need a fundamental shift in the narrative, in the workplace and out. So we've touched on what neurodivergence is, some of the problems with neurodivergent folks, and some of the accommodations that we can put in place to make the workplace better for neurodivergent folks. But why should I hire them in the first place? I mean, honestly, they just sound like hard work. When I could hire a normal person with none of the overhead. I'll skip over the fact that that's blatant discrimination and highly illegal and point out some of the positives that neurodivergent folks can bring. People with ADHD are typically highly creative. And our industry is a creative one. I have long held the position that code is art. We are solving complex problems and we want to do it in the most elegant way possible. Creativity is absolutely key. Creativity gives us different approaches to problems. It gives us new ways to look at things. It gives us innovation. Surely we want innovation and creativity. Another trait of ADHD is hyperfocus. It's not all the time, and it's not on demand. But you get the ADHD brain engaged, and it will be laser focused on a problem and attack it with a vigor that is frankly impressive. Incidentally, if you think getting the ADHD brain is a problem, getting the ADHD brain engaged is a problem with ADHD, I would posit that actually it's a failing of management to not get the staff motivated and engaged. Perhaps make your workplace more interesting. If you've got an autistic worker whose specialist interest is programming, well, we need no motivation. We just need a direction to go in. I write code in my spare time. I write code when playing games. If a space sim does not take 3 days to program my joysticks, well, I mean, it's an arcade game, not a space sim. I've already mentioned that ADHD people are good in a crisis. When everything is on fire, they will absolutely shine. They will take control. They will quickly find solutions, workarounds, way forwards. Arguably, every team needs an ADHD person for crisis management. Both ADHD and autistic folks are detail-oriented. I mean, autism can be very much synonymous with pure, unrefined pedantry. We're going to spot problems, identify vulnerabilities, and generally improve things with the process, with the code. We're bringing in the coding standards, the linters, the good practices. The autistics especially are bringing in order. And the ADHD folks are making sure that that order is not too rigid. There are loads of benefits of hiring neurodiverse folks. And I'm willing to bet you're already benefiting from some of them because we are everywhere. And yes, I could continue to list the stereotypes, but we're also all individuals. In lots of ways, our disability presents in myriad ways. Just like everyone in this world, we are unique. Our drawbacks may be a bit bigger for a given definition of bigger, but our positives are arguably also bigger than normal people. Again, heavy lifting on the normal. So here's an idea. Let's perhaps stop focusing on labels and start focusing on people as a whole. Let's educate ourselves about what it really means to be neurodivergent and what an individual's neurodiversity actually means. And most importantly of all, let's remove the stigma of mental health. It is something that affects almost all of us, either directly or indirectly. It is a feature of the human condition. We should be talking about it. Okay, so my slides generally have some relevance about what I'm talking about. Historically, I've used stock photographs that were thematically aligned with the subject. These days, I shove a bunch of keywords into Midjourney or DALL-E and grab whatever the AI punts out. This time, I mean, we'll see if you can guess some of the keywords. I mean, this image is absolutely ridiculous, and I just had to use it. Okay, so neurodivergence is a colossal subject. I have not even begun to scratch the surface in this talk. There is not enough time. But hopefully this has been a sort of amuse-bouche on the subject. I'm also not an expert about a great many things, in fact. But just like most people who suspect that they might be neurodivergent, I've made neurodivergence one of my specialist subjects. I have spent an inordinate amount of time looking into it in detail, which is why I have no problem with people who self-diagnose. Because yes, it may have started with a TikTok video, but I guarantee they went on to more videos, then longer form YouTube videos, and then onto the online tests, and then the formal definitions, the DSM-5, academic articles, research papers. They've done the research. Yes, they might be wrong, but if they are, they're just setting a sort of slight edge. They've got a slightly different neurodivergence to what actually they may have. They are valid in their neurodivergence. Now, we've got a little bit of time left. And what I'd like to do here is actually open the floor to general discussion on neurodivergence. I want to hear your thoughts on neurodivergence on the workplace. I want to hear your lived experience. And I'm happy to field questions, but this is a rare opportunity because I am willing to accept this is more of a comment than a question. The floor is open. Thank you very much.